Hello, everyone. My name is Grant Parker, and I'm the Interim Director of Stanford Global Studies, a division of Stanford University that sits inside the School of Humanities and Sciences and acts as an umbrella for 14 regional and transnational centers. Today, it's especially important to start with a recognition that Stanford campus sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land is of great importance to the Ohlone people and has since time immemorial been so. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have the responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relation to Native peoples. Now, Indigenous Data Sovereignty, or IDS, has been defined by Stephanie Rainie et al. In a recent publication as, and I quote, the right of Indigenous peoples to govern the collection, ownership, and application of data about Indigenous communities, peoples, lands, and resources, end quote. Its emergence has taken place in the past decade and been described as a double-edged sword. On one hand, IDS gives scope for development opportunities that reflect Indigenous aspirations. On the other, it cannot easily be disentangled from all the baggage linked to colonialism and discrepant experience. For too long, researchers and state agencies have been free to digitize and publicize Indigenous knowledge in a context of open data without permission. In the process, Indigenous peoples have typically been removed from data governance practice in the name of openness. How might the situation be addressed? What are some of the best practices for researchers? How can the debate draw productively on different parts of the world? If much of the debate has been at the level of policy, what are the implications for heritage curation in museums, for example? The aim of this global dialogue is to consider case studies from different parts of the world, highlighting best practices and possibilities and mapping out productive approaches. We are fortunate indeed to be able to call upon leading experts to share their thoughts and to frame the discussion on a topic that has so many different ramifications. I'm delighted to be able to call on Dr. Elspeth Iralu, Visiting Assistant Professor of Indigenous Planning in the Department of Community and Regional Planning at the University of New Mexico, to introduce our distinguished speakers and to moderate the discussion. Over to you, Elspeth.
Thank you, Grant. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today to talk about Indigenous data sovereignty. And I'm especially excited that our conversation today is with such a diverse panel of experts from all over the world. And I think we'll have a lot to gain from being in this kind of transnational conversation together. We have three speakers today. Lyndon Ormond Parker, who's an associate professor at Australian National University, Yelena Porsanger, museum manager at the Sami Museum and docent in Indigenous Studies at the University of Helsinki, and Amelia Winger-Bearskin, associate professor of AI and the arts at the University of Florida. And so what's going to happen today is I'll invite each speaker to share a short presentation with us of about 15 minutes. And I'll introduce each speaker before they present. And then once we've heard from all three, we'll have time for discussion among the presenters, and then also time for those of you joining us to also pose questions for discussion. So our first speaker today is Lyndon Ormond Parker, who is an associate professor at Australian National University. Ormond Parker is an Aboriginal man of Yalluwar descent from the Barkly Tableland region of the Northern Territory. He is an Australian Research Council Research Fellow with the Centre for Heritage and Museum Studies, Australian National University, and the Principal Research Fellow with the Mapping Digital Inclusion and Media Use in Remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Communities project with the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society. He has been involved in advocacy, policy development, and research at the local, national, and international level, focused on Indigenous communities, cultural heritage, information technology, digital inclusion, materials conservation, and repatriation. So I'll pass it to you, Lyndon.
Thanks, Elspeth. I'd like to start by acknowledging the First Nations custodians of the land for where we're all meeting today and dialing in from. I extend my respect to all First Nations people and communities that have collaborated with our research over the last 2 years. And I'd like to thank all of the speakers and the wonderful organisers from Stanford for this webinar today. I'm going to talk about Indigenous data sovereignty. So the internationally agreed definition for Indigenous data sovereignty was recently developed in 2014 by the Indigenous Data Sovereignty Collective. They've agreed that Indigenous data sovereignty refers to the rights of Indigenous people to exercise ownership over Indigenous data. Ownership of data can be expressed through the creation, collection, access, analysis, interpretation, management, dissemination, and use of Indigenous data. Indigenous data sovereignty principles are designed to guide and practice, in particular in Australia, the work of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in managing their own data. So there have been 5 principles developed for Indigenous data sovereignty, and these include, at a recent summit, number 1, that Indigenous people should exercise control over the data ecosystem, including creation, development, stewardship, analysis, dissemination, and infrastructure. That data should be contextualized and disaggregated, and that means it should be available, accessible at the individual level, the community level, and at the First Nations level. The data should be relevant and empower sustainable self-determination and effective self-government of First Nations communities. That data structure should be accountable to Indigenous peoples and First Nations people. Data should be protective and respect our individual and collective interests. So along with the data sovereignty principles, we have also the right of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to autonomously decide how and when their data is collected and accessed and who uses it. That it ensures that data is used on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' own priorities, values, cultures, and worldviews and diversity. And today I want to talk also about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research that I'm conducting and how I apply and our project applies the Indigenous data sovereignty values and principles. So one of the other issues around data sovereignty is the 5 principles, which I've just talked about. But with data sovereignty comes data governance. So I'm going to talk briefly about Indigenous data governance now. So Indigenous governance principles are enacted through the Indigenous data governance mechanism. So Indigenous governance focuses on decision-making and places Indigenous people in a position of power to self-determine all characteristics of their data. This decision-making power contributes to reshaping the various elements of Indigenous data ecosystems, including creation, development, collection, stewardship, analysis, and dissemination. So, slide 5, limited data for First Nations people. Data is crucial for ensuring First Nations communities who need the most services do not remain hidden. That shared access to data and information empowers Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and First Nations communities to make their own decisions around self-determination and development. Data can support the aspirations of communities to make informed decisions about their own lives. I'm going to quickly now talk about our project measuring digital inclusion in First Nations regional communities in Australia. And the project's called Mapping the Digital Gap, developed out of the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. The Australian Indigenous Digital Inclusion Index is a survey used to measure digital inclusion right across the nation here in Australia, and it's been operating since 2015. This allows us to understand how digital inclusion varies across Australia and across different social groups over time. And as a national survey, the ADII, as I'll refer to it, has traditionally only been able to provide limited insight to digital inclusion for First Nations peoples because of the very low sample size. And we really haven't been able to measure it in the past. So Telstra, a major telecommunications organisation in Australia, is a major funding for the Mapping the Digital Gap project, which is a 4-year longitudinal study of digital inclusion and media use in First Nations communities here in Australia. Mapping the Digital Gap project uses an adaptive version of the ADII survey, but we also include in our survey for First Nations people to include phone and media use, and also the way that people watch TV, listen to radio, and how First Nations media is being developed and used in regional and remote communities. The survey is accompanied by qualitative research where we interview service providers and individuals within the community, as well as conducting the survey. Slide 7. Now, I want to talk about our community partnerships. So as part of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance, it's important that research projects collaborate with First Nations people and communities. So we collaborate on our project with partnering with First Nations organisations in each of the 12 regional and remote communities in which we work. We also employ local community co-researchers at the local level to conduct the qualitative research, and we go on site into the community and partner with those organisations and the individual community researchers. It's really important that we partner with local people to conduct the surveys, especially where we work in communities where English is a second or third language, and we need local community Indigenous speakers of the local language of the places we work. So we have a partnership model working with organisations and community researchers on site. Our community researchers are essential to ensuring a broad participation of the local community members in the research, and they also act as interpreters, and they also are very informed and help translate the research questions so that community members with limited English can be provided with the right question and have an insight into the research that we're doing and can make informed decisions and responses to our surveys. So I'd also like to thank all of our community researchers and our 12 partner community organisations. So we've had over 22 researchers over the last 2 years conducting our research. So slide 8, why is this research needed? So first, remote First Nations people are among the most digitally excluded in Australia, we have found from our initial surveys of the national census, and that the First Nations digital gap is widening, and the gap increases with the remoteness and for smaller communities and homelands. We saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was an increase for online services, including schooling, working. We noticed that the gap was also widening, and it really highlighted the disparity between the haves and have-nots and those that are digitally included and those that are digitally excluded during the COVID pandemic. So the remote surveys that we do, it's really important that they're done face-to-face and in language and not over the phone, because as we've found that in some communities that work in, there is very limited access to even basic telephone services, where a telephone may be very congested during the day or people can barely send a text message. So it was important to go into communities to really assess levels of digital inclusion and access to things like Wi-Fi and internet. So, and also I'd like to make the point that without connectivity, how can communities and individuals enact data sovereignty in a digital world? So I'll just quickly talk about our methodology. We're informed by the Australian Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, Code of Ethics for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research, as well as the Ethical Conduct for Research in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Communities, put out by the National Health and Medical Research Council of Australia. So, and we also adapted the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty and data governance in all of the work that we do. So, strong governance also ensures that the data collected supports the priorities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities. So some of our research questions were bespoke directly, specifically to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And this helps ensure that the research results are relevant to the communities in which the research was conducted. So in terms of data sovereignty, our research is led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including myself. Our team includes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers on the ground. The data is collected and framed for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's use. We do feedback the communities can have access to the raw data and results, but we also provide a community-based report, and anyone can read them online at the moment. And we also provided a plain English document specifically for each community, but also we drafted a framework for how a community could become more digitally included based on the needs for those individual communities. And for example, whether it means that people need to have access to more Wi-Fi, or whether people need improvements in the mobile services that they currently use. It might also mean checking out the radio and television services, and having this research enables communities to advocate for themselves on their own behalf. So slide 10, First Nations framework. In this project, we undertake surveys to measure levels of phone access to telephone, media, and the internet, as well as the affordability of those services and the ability of individuals to actually utilize and use those services. And this enables comparison with the National Australian Digital Inclusion Index results. We also take, as I mentioned before, qualitative research through interviews with community leaders and service agencies. So our digital inclusion framework also includes 3 key elements: the access, affordability, and ability. So to date, we've conducted over 500 surveys and around 140 interviews. So I'm just going to quickly talk about some results. And the first result is slide 11 on access, telecommunications access. So what we found was that most Aboriginal people in the 12 remote communities have prepaid mobile phone as their primary internet and phone use access. That means that you pay upfront, you purchase a voucher for $30, you charge up your phone. We also found that these prepaid services are the most expensive in the country for data. We also found that public phones are still used where there is no mobile coverage. There is a low household take-up of the National Broadband Network Sky Muster service. That is a satellite service for internet access. We've also found that while mobile coverage has increased over the last decade, there is still around 670 communities or small community homelands that have no communication services or no mobile services at all. 10 out of the 11 sites that we visited had 4G. However, we found that most had issues of being patchy, congested, and low penetration into buildings as well. So we found reliability of services was a huge issue in regional remote Australia. We found that low household computer use, and most of the technology was used on people's mobile phones. We found that there has been an increase in Wi-Fi services in some communities, and those services have been provided by local agencies such as the library or a government service office where people can stand out the front and access those Wi-Fi services. Our report includes case studies about the different types of Wi-Fi being used in community, including Wi-Fi mesh. So we've also found that communities understand the importance of connectivity, and as government services now move to online, there is a greater need to actually be connected as First Nations people. So slide 12, affordability, we found that, I'll quickly go through this as I'm running out of time. We found that with the prepaid mobile service, it was one of the most expensive in the country to be operating. And we found that it's the poorest people and most disadvantaged that tend to pay the most. And on ability, slide 13, we saw that there's been a rapid uptake of mobile services. And also, as you would understand, we found younger people are more tech savvy than older people. And so we've also found that people living with disabilities, also there is a large digital divide, and those that speak a language other than English at home, there is also a broader gap in people's ability. So social media provides a means of communication with family and friends. There's a high uptake of Facebook and other social media. We found that in terms of cyber safety was a huge concern, and people were susceptible to scams and online bullying. There is a demand for more appropriate training for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the community, including accessing things like banking and the like. So we'll go on to slide 14. And we also found that the ADII aligns with 4 key thresholds for understanding how people experience digital inclusion. We have highly excluded with a score of 45, excluded 45 and above and below. And so you can see from this, there are a lot of issues that need to be resolved. So slide 15, media access. We found that most in entertainment in communities, a lot of it was done through the mobile, people accessing YouTube because the satellite TV services were not working in the majority of households. But we also found that the satellite TV services vary greatly between all of the communities, depending on the technological availability in the community itself for people to rectify and fix up problems with the television and satellite services. Slide 16, media access. I think we've just briefly talked about that, and I'm going to finish up there on the last slide. So we have an organisation in Australia called the Australian Government Productivity Commission. In their report released in January, they have actually recommended the establishment of a Bureau of Indigenous Data. And so with this, the reason behind the establishment of Indigenous data is so that Australian government and Australian governments in all jurisdictions could actually get together and provide information around Indigenous data held by all jurisdictions, and that's historical as well as contemporary data, so that some of that data is governed by an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance board, and that to make that information more accessible to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon. Our next speaker is Yelena Porsanger, who is currently working as a museum manager of the Sami Museum in Karasjok. She holds the title of Docent in Indigenous Studies at the University of Helsinki in Finland. Porsanger is a Sami scholar, holds a doctoral degree in the history of religion and Indigenous research from the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway, and a degree in philosophy from the University of Helsinki. Yelena worked previously as director of the Nordic Sami Institute, as senior researcher, and as lecturer at various universities in the Nordic countries. From 2007 to 2011, she was the chief editor of a peer-reviewed multidisciplinary research journal, which accepts research articles originally written in Sami languages. She's also an editorial board member of a research journal of the Sami Language and Culture Research Association. And her research interests include Indigenous methodologies, Indigenous epistemologies, Indigenous religions, source criticism from an Indigenous perspective, repatriation of Sami cultural heritage, Sami and Indigenous oral traditions, Sami and Indigenous traditional knowledge, three-dimensional digitization of Indigenous cultural heritage, Sami and Indigenous museology. In 2021 to 2022, Yelena curated an exhibition on the topic of repatriation. The exhibition traces histories of sacred Sami drums from their original spiritual context through their expropriation, through their contemporary reclamation and desires for return. And there's a 360-degree virtual tour that's available online. So I'll pass it on to you, Yelena.
Thank you very much. Olu kiitos ja perjää puhkaida. Sihke alap mugitte kuulevas olu muita ja puhkaida ja perustit tänä alap mutiedo hatsamis. So these were greetings in the Sami language to everyone across the globe, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, who are interested in the topic of Indigenous data sovereignty. I will share my screen. Present. Well, I'm going to tell today about a case of the three-dimensional digitization of our cultural heritage. we have conducted at our Indigenous Museum. I will tell about challenges we met and solutions we made during this work, which we have conducted from the Indigenous Sami perspective. We created three-dimensional models of the 5 Sami sacred drums. I'm going to tell and show a bit later for the exhibition which was mentioned on the topic of repatriation. The Sami people have been or are amongst the indigenous communities around the world whose cultural heritage was collected by foreigners through the course of centuries, and drums were the most sacred belongings of our ancestors. Our drums were taken away from us hundreds of years ago. And we created an exhibition which focuses attention to the return of our sacred drums back to the Sami people. We used three-dimensional models and technologies and faced many challenges. And first, I wish to put all this work into context, and then I will tell more. So I work and conducted this work with the three-dimensional digitization at the Sami Museum in Karasjok, which is under the Sami Museum Association, Riddo Tuottarmuseat, which is a Sami name, literally meaning from the coastal line to inland. And you can see an iconic map created by our famous Sami artist, Hans Ragnar Mathisen. This is the map of our Sami land, which goes across the national borders of 4 countries. But this map, created in 1975, shows Sami land, Sapmi, without national borders. So where in the globe are we? You can see the red field in northern Finlandia and line showing where we are situated. Our work is based on indigenous methodologies, and here to the left you can see a book, quite one of the newest books on indigenous research methodologies, which contains many articles which are related to the Sami research context and written by the Sami scholars. Our three-dimensional digitization is based on very wide experiences, working experiences. We have conducted digitization in Europe, United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, Norway, even in Italy, in Rome, and in the US. And our work at the Smithsonian Institution has resulted in an article recently published in Museum Anthropology, and people who are interested in this can read this article. But most of all, we have worked with digitization in our Sami museums and in collaboration between various Sami museums in Norway, Finland, and Sweden. So we can say that our digitization work is based, and the point of departure is our indigenous Sami perspective. And how is it an indigenous perspective? It's our Sami museums are governed by and funded through the Sami Parliament of Norway, and you can see a beautiful picture of our parliament building, which is situated in the same village where our museum is situated, in Karasjok. We represent and we work with the local communities, and we use our indigenous Sami language in our work, which at this very museum where I'm sitting now, the Sami Museum in Karasjok, the main working language is our indigenous language. The drums. So now you can see some images of the drums. These 3 images are the representations of the 3-dimensional models we made. And here are 2-dimensional pictures of some other drums. So all these drums which we made 3-dimensional models of are about 300 and even 400 years old. And neither of these drums was in possession of our Sami communities during the time of our work and digitization. The name of the exhibition is in Sami Rektot, which means going or coming home. And in a way, this one word in our language, it tells both about a process of coming home, and it represents a result of homecoming. And this exhibition is a call for the return of the drums. And as I was presented already by our moderator, so this exhibition, it traces histories of our drums from the time when the drums were expropriated, mostly by force, or our ancestors were obliged to submit their drums to the authorities, or the drums were burned, destroyed, taken as souvenirs, sent to the king of Denmark and other wealthy people, and after a while were sold or given as gifts, as souvenirs, and now they are in the collections of, in museum collections and in private collections. I will come further to this issue a bit later, but the communities, they express their wish to get these precious pieces of our cultural heritage back. So when the drums were taken, they became voiceless, and they have been in the voiceless time quite for a while since they were taken. There are about 72 drums in different museums and private collections. And at the time, only 5 of these drums are in the possession of Sami museums and the Sami communities. So our exhibition visualizes the absence of the drums by the means of 3 dimensions, storytelling, and maps. And here you can see one map, which is you can see the Scandinavian peninsula and this faceless images of our drums, because we do not know, based on the historical sources, where exactly the drums were taken from. But we do know where the drums are at the time, at present. And you can see that our drums are in France, in Germany, and the United Kingdom, in southern Scandinavian countries, in Denmark, and even in Rome. And just to make you feel how we made the this animation was made based on the 3-dimensional models we created, and I would like to show this animation with you. It was something technical with this, but anyway, if you wish to see more, you can go to the our virtual tour, which is available online in this exhibition. And for the opening of this exhibition, the community gathered, and you can see the happy faces and very excited faces of people who appreciated the presence of the drums, at the same time the absence of the drums with the community. And we gave a yoik to the drum, which we recently received back and got repatriated, which is in the middle of the picture, which you can see above. And so all of this was very nice and very exciting and very emotional. But what challenges have we met when we were making the three-dimensional models? Yes, you can see our team. It was just myself together with my American colleague, Matthew Magnani, who currently works at the University of Maine in the US. You can see that we used the 3D scanners, white light scanners, and photogrammetry to make three-dimensional models. And you can see an image where I'm standing and looking at the wall, one of three walls where we had the projections of the three-dimensional models and animations. And so we went to Germany, we went to Sweden, because these drums were not in the territory of our communities. And we worked with several mainstream museums very well indeed. And we got a lot of support and understanding from the mainstream museums. But when the 3D data was gathered, so we started thinking about the intersection between digital and physical ownership. So the three-dimensional technologies, they allow us to begin conversations about ownership of digital files. You know, we are talking about digital data sovereignty, and of course, indigenous data sovereignty, but also about ownership of cultural heritage itself. So we got so many questions. We are now in our hands, we have three-dimensional data representing precious pieces of our cultural heritage. So what questions we have been going through? What will happen to the collected 3D data? How the 3D data files will be managed? How the data will be stored? And who will have access to this data? And how it will be structured and systematized, and what file names shall be used so that they will be discoverable after a while, and how we can institutionalize the data storage so that this data storage will not be dependent on the persons, on ourselves, when other people will come and take over this work, so the files will be still discoverable. How the data will be used, and how we can share the files following the principles of indigenous data sovereignty. So what we did, we had many conversations about this with some of our Sami scholars of law, and we had conversations with our museum's staff, and we contacted our colleagues from other Sami museums discussing these issues. And all these questions were so new, because in our Sami context, we are the first Sami museum who started working with three-dimensional digitization. Nobody had answers to any of these questions. And what we did this work in 2021. So 2022, we opened the exhibition. And we decided to make a three-dimensional animation based on the models we made. And of course, we needed to share the files with the outsider experts in order to give them a possibility to make 3D animation. So what we discovered, that we needed guidelines. We needed some guidelines for our museum association and for the work with three-dimensional data to implement these guidelines. Okay, so we made a text of based on long conversations and analysis and talks with everyone who we thought could be knowledgeable and could contribute. So we discovered that we developed the guidelines for 3D data management and sharing. And here is just the first page of this 2 pages long document, which is openly available on our website. And so anyone can get access to this document. And based on these guidelines, we made data sharing agreements with the outsider experts, which say that after following the completion of the project or requested task, we asked that the outsider experts will delete the files from all locations. So afterwards, we see that it is a need for update. It is a need for capacity building. It is a need for infrastructure, even though here in the Nordic countries, which are quite wealthy, so it is not comparable with the case which was described by the previous speaker. But anyway, capacity building is a key, and infrastructure. And we see the need for awareness raising about Indigenous data sovereignty here in the Nordic countries. So the conversations about this topic have just started. And we see the need for attention by policymakers to this issue. And we extended an open invitation to discussions about the applicability of our guidelines in the Pan-Sami context and internationally when I participated in a conference, the Nordic Conference on Sami Intangible Cultural Heritage, which was organized by the Arts and Culture Norway and the Sami Parliament of Norway in 2022 in November. And report is available. And this open invitation still stands. So I do wish that this presentation can result in some more attention to this interesting case and to further conversations and discussions about Indigenous data sovereignty related to digitization. So welcome to our Sami Museum. You can see some pictures and just one picture with the snow, although we have snow 8 months a year. But anyway, everyone is welcome to our beautiful place whenever, and our contact information is here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yelena. That's beautiful. Our next speaker is Amelia Winger-Bearskin, who is an artist who innovates with artificial intelligence in ways that positively impact our community and the environment. She is a Banks Family Preeminence Endowed Chair and Associate Professor of Artificial Intelligence and the Arts at the Digital Worlds Institute at the University of Florida. She is the founder of the University of Florida AI Climate Justice Lab and the Talk to Me About Water Collective. She founded Wampum Codes, which is both an award-winning podcast and an ethical framework for software development based on Indigenous values of co-creation. She continued her research in 2021 at Stanford University as their artist and technologist in residence, made possible by the Stanford Visiting Artist Fund in honor of the Roberta Bowman Denning. In 2022, she was awarded a MacArthur Foundation Award as part of the Sundance AOP Fellowship cohort for her project Cloud World, Sky World, which will be part of the Whitney's Sunrise Sunset series. Amelia is Haudenosaunee of the Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, Deer Clan on her mother's side, and her late father was Jewish Baha'i. Take it away, Amelia.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and I cannot wait to come and visit the Sami Museum sometime, Yelena. It looks amazing and beautiful. And Lyndon, I would love to visit you as well. I will be in Australia in May, so I will hit you up. I would love to meet both of you in person. This is wonderful to be here, at least together virtually. So Nyawe, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be a part of this amazing group. Today I'm going to be talking about creation stories. And so I'm obviously very obsessed with my own creation story for my own traditions, but I really just enjoy listening to creation stories from across many different indigenous cultures. So this is a really fun forum to bring in some of these ideas. Okay, so creation stories. Creation stories are important to to all cultures because they embed values, they have scientific know-how, tools for future generations. Creation stories are special kinds of stories because they do not simply provide an account for why the world is the way it is, but they also orient us towards possible futures that exist in accordance with our values as a society, and they produce a foundation upon which we can build a shared civilization. For instance, in the King James Bible, we have those famous lines, "In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." So those three clauses, right? We have those three clauses already set up for an entirely logocentric cosmology that informs much of the discourse of entire Western civilization. And the Western mode of understanding the world, writing, recording, delineating, are all contained in this very first sentence, like an oak in an acorn, right? So the creation story of my people, the Haudenosaunee, Seneca Cayuga, begins in a place called Skyworld. Like our satellites and oceanic tubes of the internet, it is a place to commune with those who are far away. In Skyworld, there was a woman, Sky Woman, who fell towards our ocean and was saved by the creatures who live below. A muskrat, a beaver, turtle, and many others who make sure that she has a soft landing on the back of the turtle shell. Many of you may have heard us indigenous of North America call North America Turtle Island. That's why. One of the reasons why we're not the only ones who have this creation story. So she brings with her in that fall sacred herbs and plants so that she can make the world grow. She gives birth to twins, one who makes beauty and one who makes evil. One who creates the rose and the other the thorn. One who creates clean rivers and one who pollutes those rivers. There are as many creation stories as there are peoples, right? But if you study them and you listen to storytellers recount them, you start to notice a certain maybe family resemblance between them, recurring motifs that connect them across different times and places. Our creation story, you can hear echoes of that earth diver trope, right? Where a divine creature, an animal, or a human descends upon the earth from another realm. This narrative pattern occurs in creation stories all over the world. Like you can hear similar stories in Japan and Finland and West Africa, and the Eurasian steppe, and of course, North America. We also have in our story that trope of the divine twins, which recurs in several places in Western mythology as well, like Adam and Eve, or Cain and Abel, or Jacob and Esau, as well as places like Romulus and Remus in the story concerning the founding of Rome, and elsewhere throughout Eurasia. So these similarities excite the imagination, curiosity. So I like finding similarities. But the parallels that really demand, I think, all of our attention, in my opinion, are the structural similarities in the types of loads that they bear for the societies that tell them. The Haudenosaunee one, of course, is the one I know best, and it illustrates this principle very well. It contains wisdom about planting seasons, about herbs, about agriculture, and our values connected to animals and nature. When we were once 6 warring nations, this creation story, which was in our DNA, helped us to lay down our weapons and form a confederacy based upon our great law of peace. Coated with wampum shells. This law is sometimes referred to as the Gainashgoa. The laws, a constitution, were divided into 117 articles. The United Haudenosaunee Nations are symbolized by an eastern white pine tree called the Tree of Peace. And each nation or tribe plays a delineated role in the conduct of government. We believe the events of this formation date back to the late 12th century, around the year 1190. So the story sort of has survived, right? It survived a lot. It survived forced removal from my ancestral lands in the Northeast Woodlands area, or upstate New York, where I spent most of my time growing up with other Haudenosaunee in the basin of many tribal reservations, not just Seneca and Cayuga. My tribe then was moved as part of the Trail of Tears, which is part of American history, to Oklahoma. And that's where my close family members live today and where I'm federally enrolled. So the first time I heard this creation story was at Strawberry Festival. And I didn't hear the whole story in one sitting or even two. It is a really long story and one that requires us to slow down and celebrate the summer season. Strawberry Festival is a time when we gather and play games and listen to day after day to the way that our world was made. So for me, when I revisit this story, I believe there are a few lessons that need to be a part of my practice as an AI educator and artist using artificial intelligence, right? So the first one is, where does our knowledge come from? Well, like Sky Woman, we AI, educators and artists and researchers, we came from a connected tissue of the internet, which plays a large role in the formation of the insight and information many of our models are now trained from. And those were created and gathered without the consent of the communities who created these assets, words, images, and songs. So that has to be acknowledged. All right, 2, where did we come from? So while much of the artificial intelligence funding is still heavily in the world's superpowers, AI must be used as a tool for an equitable world, for peace, and not just to reinforce ancient colonial borders and continue the process of colonization. Colonization is a tool that created our current water crisis and our climate change. To support the survival of our planet, we need AI to be on the side of a decolonized worldview. All right, number 3, what plants and seeds are we giving it? So I say it meaning the AI, which of course there's not just one, but the entire field, right? So what seeds are we building into this field? Right now, we're feeding these models images, text, connections, commerce, all created on the internet. And of course, writing corpora of books that have been scanned and digitized. But there are many things that make us human, our embodied intelligence, our bodily limitations, and our values around truth and trustworthiness that are not yet adequately represented by the features that can be extracted about us via observation. We've had, many ways of digitizing our daily lives, but our digital systems still cannot account for what I really love this researcher and philosopher, Frank Jackson. He identified in a famous thought experiment called What Mary Doesn't Know. Now, this is a thought experiment. It's not real. It's just kind of something you think about and make up as a question. And he wrote a book called There's Something About Mary, not to be confused with the movie of the same name, but they did take that name, which is funny. Anyways, I digress. So for those unfamiliar with this thought experiment, this is how it goes. Jackson imagines a scientist named Mary. She was raised in a lab. Again, not a real person, just a thought experiment. Mary knows everything there is to know about human sight, how to measure it, how to understand light, how biology responds to light. She understands every single sensor, computational way of evaluating sight. Essentially, she is a sight expert in every possible way. Okay. But in her world, there's no color. She lives in a black and white lab, and she sees everything via the internet or cameras as black and white. So here's the thought experiment part. When she leaves the lab, what is it that she learns? When she sees the color red, what is the thing that she did not know before? Jackson calls this missing knowledge qualia. It is the actual experience, in this case, of seeing the color red. When she sees a rose, what does she now understand about the color that she didn't know before? So our modern AI systems are sophisticated statistical and computational models that we try to deploy in order to approximate qualia, right? But they don't have it. We're looking to define this experience, and it's vital that we can communicate what it is to be a person and our ways of knowing so that they're defendable, so that we make use of AI tools to help make our world better. And if we get this wrong, we risk creating a world not simply of machines that are unable to match the epistemology of humans, because we already have that, but actually a world in which we adopt a warped, lossy machine epistemology that flattens us into black and white, encourages us to devalue our own qualia of our own sentience and that of our kin, right? Which includes the animals and all of nature. Okay, so number 4, what about those two twins? One that makes the world better and one that makes it worse. There's, of course, a lot of duality built in the way we discuss AI, which you can hear even in the tension between, those two, right? AI has the ability to read these data points that we're creating by the billions daily. Humans do not have this ability. An individual human could spend their entire life trying to interpret this vastness of data, and they would fail, right? So because of this disparity between human and machine computational power, it becomes difficult for us to understand the black box decisions that occur in algorithms. Often experts in adjacent fields don't even get to weigh in on processes before these new tools are rolled out. And we see how that connects, with the writer's strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike, right? When you're not getting experts in other fields to weigh in, people make note and rightfully question, right? So people often ask me what the AI thinks about this or what the AI thinks about that, as if there's like one AI, as if we've jumped past all this phase of experimentation, regulation, and have arrived at a sentience of one true AI, which maybe speaks and we can only listen and maybe provide commentary in hushed, reverent tones. Other times people say that they enjoy co-creating with AI art generators because it's like collaborating with all artists in the world, except that it's not. So as someone who's done the work of collaborating, sometimes painfully, with many artists, the joy of collaboration is not for me typing words and then stealing bits of art from others to make a new AI collage, even if it has 5 fingers on each hand. But when you ask an AI generator to paint you a night sky, you'll likely see something found in the Western canon drawn back to you. Or when you ask ChatGPT to write you a poem, it rhymes in English. So we're not co-creating with everyone, but we're co-creating with a particular worldview. The magic we could do is interpreted through this tool, which hides human workers and moderators, and it presents us back something quote unquote from scratch, but it was stolen and built upon the back of precarious laborers. So we certainly have seen the way in which AI has been used to track people, suggesting continued bias in policing and police enforcement and sentencing, and continues to implement bias in hiring or lending or other financial systems. So that's our present, but to look towards our future, I think we need to look at the creation and the myth we wrap in it. So for this new AI age, we need to think of a collective creation myth. A myth that does not cast AI as the aristocrats making art and writing poetry and deciding our political destinies, while we humans are left to toil in unsafe conditions at 9-to-5 jobs, earning a minimum wage that can't keep us out of poverty. I work with AI because I do believe it's a tool that can help us understand, simulate, and interrogate climate data in a way that can help us adjust to our climate crisis. I believe that data and science storytelling needs to move outside of the walls of academia so that we can hear climate stories unfiltered from those who are experiencing the climate crisis most acutely. So we do not know yet what the creation story is for AI. But I hope in the thoughts I've laid out today, we can begin to orient the conversations we have about this technology in a way that is strategic and truthful and appreciates the real stakes of the stories we tell and the myths that we're making about AI. Thank you. Yahweh.
Thank you, Amelia. These were 3 incredible presentations, and I wanted to kind of just pose a few questions first. And it looks like we're getting some questions in the Q&A as well from the audience. So we'll make sure to reserve some time for those questions as well. As I was listening to you all, there was one kind of big question that came to mind, and I think it's maybe helpful for me to give a little context for this big question. I live in the southwestern US in Tiwa territory, but my community of origin is Nagaland, which is an indigenous territory that is on either side of the India-Myanmar border. And I was thinking as you all were speaking about how my own community in Nagaland has been dealing with things like an ongoing repatriation process, talking to a museum about Naga human remains and returning those. But a lot of that has come, sort of the guidance for that process has come from being in conversation with Indigenous peoples elsewhere in the world. And so this is part of a Stanford Global Studies webinar. And so I'm really interested to hear from each of you about how you see the role of kind of transnational Indigenous discourse in your communities and in your work's experience with Indigenous data sovereignty. So I'm curious about how has talking with or learning from other Indigenous peoples played a role at the local level? What does that look like maybe? Or how do you imagine this kind of transnational Indigenous learning might inform Indigenous data sovereignty?
I guess I could quickly go first. One of the things that in Australia, we have a lot of national conferences, we have cultural heritage conferences, native title conferences. So it sort of happens at the regional, local level, our engagement, then at the national level through national conferences. But Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been involved internationally in the development of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I was fortunate enough to spend some time in Geneva in the early 2000s, like 1999, so showing my age, and drafting that Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And I remember the Sami being there, and Native Americans, people there, and Naga people actually from all over the world. That's where I learned about your community, and I learned about the the recognized tribes in India. And so I think through that international global engagement of Indigenous peoples, that's how we learn and share, and we have a shared commonality. And I think that's expressed through the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the support shown by nation states in signing up to that. Unfortunately, there were 4 that didn't: Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States, which they have all signed up to those principles in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And in Australia, we have had inquiries into how we can implement those principles domestically. And so we talk about data sovereignty and other Indigenous data governance. And I think those principles are really reflected in those international documents. And the international document for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is also came about from principles set out through the fight for the rights of Indigenous people all across the world many, many years before the declaration. So we've had many declarations in Australia way before the UN Declaration, which is declarations around our right to self-determine, our rights to our land, our rights to our culture, and our rights to, stop having our kids removed or forcibly removed onto missions, etc. So it's through those shared experiences of colonization that we've come to this position. Thanks.
Okay, maybe I can say a couple of words that the Sami, we are a cross-border people anyway, and we don't think about ourselves like we are working internationally because it is our Sami territories we work within. But we have had a long tradition of collaboration with Indigenous peoples across the globe. And politically, culturally, conferences on various topics have been conducted in collaboration with Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Canada, the US, and the South America and Central America. So it's unlimited. And it has always been our strength that when we are talking about our sisters and brothers in other parts of the Indigenous world internationally, so it is what gives us strength. And when you asked how we can might be informed about Indigenous data sovereignty through collaboration with other Indigenous peoples, it is the way to go. So we cannot do it just within our own communities and within the national borders of our countries. So it's very important to work internationally. And we often receive guests. People come to our museum from Indigenous people come to visit our museum, and so I believe that we are quite known in many parts of the Indigenous world. I don't mean the Sami museum where I work at, but the Sami and Sami culture. And so in research, I have been collaborating with so many brilliant Indigenous scholars, and I believe that this is something which is the strength of Indigenous scholarship.
I think I just 100% agree with what both of you are stating. So much international collaboration and knowledge sharing and strategic planning together. And I myself am part of a nation that we say the border crossed us, right? That's between Canada and the United States. And I sit on the board of Imaginative, a really wonderful international arts and media festival that's in Toronto, even though I'm an American. It's really wonderful to learn how different the challenges are in Canada, and through that international film festival have learned how different support looks for Indigenous community members all over the world, because we are a globally Indigenous film and media arts festival. So it's really been illuminating for me to learn how different the struggles are. And as Lyndon mentioned, we all have this very shared strategies of colonization that was done to us that are very similar, and yet we also have very unique ways that we are coping and dealing. And so I've learned quite a bit about how different other strategies that other peoples are using, how strategies that we may use in the US are not available to other people, or inappropriate or wouldn't work, and vice versa. And so constantly sharing both our shared experiences and also how different these trials and tribulations can be is really helpful, because often someone's difficulty that they may have in another country may become relevant for my community in the future, and almost certainly it will. Like we very frequently face challenges at different phases in global development, but yet they're the same challenges. So often we can give each other advice as someone who has just experienced or is newly experiencing a new trial and tribulation. Being leaders in education and policy change around climate justice is so central to what so many of us are doing as Indigenous people. And it again is I think we're a really great model of how this cross-border collaboration can help, because as we know, climate change is absolutely something that crosses borders, unfortunately. It's not something that water systems or land systems are contained within the regions of borders and only affect people therein. However, it is affecting Indigenous people at just an alarming rate globally. And so I feel like we've shown a really good model around cross collaboration and sharing of information and strategies that can be a model for many communities who are looking to support our planet.
Thanks. Yeah, and I hear in this like the sort of this there's like the words share came up a lot, but also all three of you emphasized sort of the particularities of specific communities, and that the what is shared is often the strategy, not not necessarily like the specific data, for example. I have a few other questions, but I thought maybe I'd give you all also a chance to ask each other questions or respond to each other's presentations if there was something that stood out that you wanted to chat about.
I guess I'll go first. But very interesting to see the digitization of museum collections. I've been involved for some time around repatriation issues, and also interested in the way that digitization can support the repatriation of community knowledge and languages, especially where information has gone overseas or has been dispersed away from community homelands. So I guess my question to both of my other speakers is, how do you work in that space of repatriation, both in terms of the physical objects and/or in terms of information and digitization of collections? Yeah, and what are the challenges for digitization and repatriation as things become more public?
Yes, that's a huge question. So when we do not work directly with repatriation, when we digitize objects of our cultural heritage, which is around the world, whether it is in the US or in Germany or in Italy. But we believe, and we have experienced, that this process of digitization, by this work, we establish relationships which make it possible in the future to start conversations about repatriation. So, and we, the Sami, we are quite well known as a peaceful people. We have never had any war with anyone. And so this is a kind of peaceful strategy of not coming and claiming something which we know it is ours. And so we have these stories, we have the language, we know about the use of these objects, but these objects are not with us. They are in other places. And these other places, they do not have the language, they do not have the terminology, they do not have the stories, but they have the objects. But this is a kind of, it's a long process. And on the other side, we here at our museum, we use digitization as a tool for consultations with our elders and our communities and involvement of our youth. So it's a lot which can be told about it, but oftentimes when the elders gather at our museum, we can share with them the digital representations of some objects, or to show what we have done in other places at our other museums with small Sami collections. And it is an interesting conversation which starts when the elders look at the digital models, and they start talking between themselves, and they come with stories, and you know how it happens. So it is a part of conversation life which can be captured, and so it's a lot of knowledge which can just come up just by looking at a digital representation of something. But what for us, so our philosophy has been that we do not intend to use a digital representation like a replacement of a physical object, but just like a vehicle to establish relationships, to raise awareness in the community, to engage the elders and the youth to a conversation about our past and present and about our traditional knowledge. So it's just unlimited what can be done.
I would say for my work, I do not work directly with museums around repatriation, but as an artist, I'm often brought in to look and respond to their collection of Indigenous objects that they own, which often comes as an incredible surprise and is a little bit weird, I would say, as an artist. So I come and they may show me what they have in wampum because of my work, or other types of things that are from my tribal nation, and we discuss the artifacts, and I have a unique vantage point where I get to often see these collections that many people don't get to see because they're in storage or places like that. And oftentimes I'm asked to come in and make a response to them. And usually I will request a meeting with as many people as I can in the institution to talk about repatriation, to begin those conversations, which puts artists in a very awkward position, because you're being usually paid to do some type of project, to comment on the collection. Oftentimes they don't talk to you really about what that object will be until you're face to face with something, and then you're in that awkward position of maybe deciding not to take something and make a living because you instead have a difficult decision to have a conversation about repatriation, but I do it anyways. And it's been interesting from that level, as an artist level, of someone who makes objects that also are in museums, and to talk about those histories and to sit with them. And I learned really incredible stories. Oftentimes they are gifts that were given to museums by amazing artisans, and those are the more recent ones, right? I'm always happy to give my artwork to museums for others to share and be able to view and appreciate the work. But then we get cloudier as we move back through history and talk about things as it's harder to understand maybe where this cradle board may have come from, or where these, especially when there's something like objects that are a part of our bodies, like our actual bodies. It becomes really difficult to have those conversations as an artist. And so I usually look to people who are experts like Elena and Lyndon to guide me in some of those conversations, because as artists, we're not always know how to have them, right? They're difficult conversations and we're not always sure how to have them. So I rely on experts who are working in repatriation to kind of help me have some grounding in those conversations, so that it doesn't appear as though I'm having any kind of combative relationship, but really trying to begin educational conversations and places of unity from what we would say good-minded and right-minded hearts, right? So I don't know, that's not a very expert. It's just a very real thing that I experience as an artist. So I don't know, maybe others have experienced similar things.
Lyndon, I would also turn your question to hear a little more about your work in repatriation.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's my other side. So I talked about a project that I do with RMIT University. I also have worked for many years, or have been known to work in the repatriation space, and that is working in institutions, documenting collections, and also advocating for the return of our ancestral remains and material culture back to communities of origin. But I'm also involved in a project at ANU called Return, Reconcile, Renew. That's Return, Reconcile, Renew, and it's basically a resource, online resource for people that are wishing to engage in provenance research and repatriation. It's triple R. I can't remember the web address, but someone might be able to pop that in the chat or the questions. And that's a guide for our community members that are working in the repatriation space. And so in Australia, I'm not too sure if everyone's aware, we have over 200 nations and languages, or even many more actually, but at least language groups that we call, and then many nations. So we're a very diverse group of people on the one continent. And so as part of the repatriation process, we also like to know where individual ancestral remains have come from, or objects have come from which communities. So we're very aware that there is a lot. So when we go into international collections, we'll often say Aboriginal Australia. Well, it's like, well, that tells us something, but from which community has that individual come from, or where do these particular objects come from? So if you guys would like, you can go to the Return, Reconcile, Renew website and have a look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's experiences in repatriation there. But things are slowly changing, and I think our rights as Indigenous people are slowly being recognised, and museums and colonial institutions are slowly recognising that returning our cultural heritage and objects and ancestral and human remains is something that's important to us, and it's important to many people and humanity. And so I think as the colonial project winds down in some respects, that repatriation is a way of healing and reconciling the past. But just on the archives, one of the things that was in the abstract for this session today was Indigenous people's right of reply to archives as well. And so that in Australia, we have an Indigenous Archives Collective, and people can Google that, talking about the right of reply to colonial archives and records of Indigenous people. So that may mean that the stories that were told in the colonial record, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a right, or Indigenous have a right of reply to those narratives. And that sort of right of reply and telling our side of the story, which never often made it into the archives, is really important. And in particular, where individuals may have been removed, where the archives talk about the history or massacres or other things relating to us, or the forced removal of children and missions, that we have, as people, have a right to reply to those archives in a sense of a bit more truth-telling, rather than the archive being held up as fact. And that other stories are actually told in that space. Thanks.
Thanks. I think we could turn to a couple questions from the audience right now. And I think that some of the themes that, like this idea of the right to reply, I think actually is very, it might seem indirectly related to these questions, but I think it's pretty important to the topic here. And so the questions that I'm looking at have to do with kind of artificial intelligence, and kind of that, asking you all to speak about that. And so one of the questions has to do with, says, do you see the role of local shallow AI as an approach to sovereignty? Does using the large models, even in Indigenous contexts, to make the world better, also uphold the colonial myth of objectivity or universality? And then there's another question that's kind of similar that has to do with the new Google News of trying to rebias AI interpretations. So I wonder if you all want to speak to some of these questions around AI and sovereignty and trying to shape AI.
So, something I use as a metaphor for my students or even sometimes faculty when I'm trying to talk about bias in AI, I'm just going to kind of throw that out there. I speak a lot in metaphors. Um, I say to my students, imagine you have a apple tree and you're feeding it water and it's almost fully grown and ready to bear fruit, but not yet, maybe in 4 or 5 more years. And you find out the water you've been feeding it is contaminated. Okay, so you get rid of that contaminated water, you purify the water, you change your irrigation system, you do something, you fix it, now it's good water. Okay. Do you eat the apple when it has finally borne fruit? And then my students are like, and I say, you shouldn't. The answer is no. I'm like, the answer is no. The answer is no, because the way that, contamination works is that tree should not bear fruit that we should eat because even the fruit is contaminated because the water source has been contaminated at any point in time. Instead, we plant new trees, we make a new system with this better irrigation, and we eat those. And that the reason I use that metaphor for the models is these large models were trained on biased data, and adding more unbiased data to them does not unbias them. So that's why we actually have to build new trees. So and I'm not saying that that's not what Google is doing. It's a radical shift, though. You can't just take a model and add less biased data to it because it was trained and grown on this contamination, right? And so it has it within the core of the way that it understands new data is baked within that system. So that's why we have to actually make new models. And again, of course, I don't work for this specific team at Google, and I can't tell you exactly how they're regrowing that apple tree, right? If they're just throwing in different weights within that data, or if they're actually starting again and trying to retrain something on non-biased data sets. I can't speak to the individual choices that are being made by that team, but I throw that out there to people because oftentimes I think, and rightfully so, it is a black box algorithm at the end of the day. There's often confusion around like, well, what does it mean if it's biased? Can't we just simply put less biased data in there? Or why are we getting biased data out? Can't we just like rank something up and above and below? And then when we zoom out a little bit bigger, the larger problem of why these systems are biased in the first place. We recently saw, I think the New York Times said like the leaders of AI and right now in the top 20, and they were all men. We see AI is still heavily developed just in the world's superpowers. There is not an independent AI initiative that could even begin to touch the scale that is something like Google or OpenAI, right? So it is not, we do not have any type of parity when it comes to the power of this rapidly developing superpower that is being spread around our world. So I guess that's what I have to say about the rebiasing. But right now, if you want to play with these tools, I highly recommend defining the edges, seeing where it breaks. It's very easy for me to use tools like image generators and say like a Native American woman, and it's going to be somebody from a tin type from a long time ago with feathers and all these like stereotypes that you imagine that people have is what I get back to me. I don't get like a professor or a scientist, or I get something from the ancient past, the ancient world, even though I didn't say ancient. I just said Native American woman. It's going to show me that because it's still backward looking. We're having backward propagating artificial intelligence, right? So it's still looking at the vast amounts of backward looking data. And we have more stereotypical wrong data than we have true data from the small sample set because Native Americans are small population wise. So if you're just looking at volumes of data for training, the true data that comes from within our community is going to be less information than the large data sets. I will give you an example that I was interviewing someone to help me with a project, and I was telling them about stories from Haudenosaunee culture, specifically Seneca, and they said, well, I don't know if I really like have to take what you say as true about what Native Americans are or do, because I follow the hashtag like land back, and I can get more data points at any moment about what it is to be Native than anything you're saying. Like your individual experience of your tribe doesn't matter. It matters the aggregate of what everyone thinks, which is so the opposite of the way Indigenous people think. Like we don't think that your individual experience as an Indigenous person matters less because there's more information out there that other people think about you. We don't think that. That's kind of cool about us. We actually are okay with understanding that your personal lived experience is true. And then bringing that to the surface is important, right? And so if we're just looking at those old-fashioned ways of looking at data, we are recolonizing the future.
Thanks. And maybe we have another question here that kind of gets back to the conversation about repatriation, but is really centering sort of digital repatriation and like what that means. And so maybe I'll just read the question here. This person says, how has the conversation around access to cultural artifacts gone? It seems a careful line between access to the digital version versus the objects being restored to tribal members instead of the mainstream museums. So I wonder if you want to kind of speak maybe more generally to this idea of digital repatriation, and maybe some of the maybe like tensions there between digital repatriation and repatriation of material objects.
This is a huge question, which I don't think that I have an answer to. So we have created less than 100 three-dimensional models of various objects of Sami cultural heritage. And what can we do? How can we show? How can we display? There are not so many platforms we could show three-dimensional models on. One internationally known is Sketchfab. And what do? They require that they require open access to everything, and that the models can be downloadable. And we had a conversation with Sketchfab and, about our right to decide what can be openly accessed, and our right to decide that nothing of what we make can be downloadable, because we are very much aware of the fact that the three-dimensional models can be, when downloaded, they can be modified, they can be printed, they can be used for whatever purposes which are not which are unacceptable in our context. So if you go to our Sketchfab profile online, you will not see any of the models. So they are privately available and privately viewable for us. And we are intending to publish some of them. But first, we are going to conduct consultations with our communities and our elders, so that we will not make these decisions on our working table, just a decision made by a museum professional, but we need to have a conversation with communities. So this is about access to the digital models, what I could say.
Thank you, Yelena. Maybe as our final question, we have this coming from our organizer here, Grant. And so the question that is posed to all three panelists is, could the panelists please share any thoughts on Indigenous language, their extinction, and any possibilities that may exist around AI or other digital tools?
I'll make a quick response. Language loss is huge globally, especially Indigenous languages. And I think there is potentially a role for AI to help with language continuation and continuity. I think part of that, in Australia, we have many languages that there are no language speakers left, but communities are reconstructing their languages and now, starting to practice re-speaking and relearning them. And also, there's a big push for those languages where there are a few speakers to continue to record them. And I think there is potential for AI to assist in that process, especially, and also digitization as well of old historical recordings of language, where language reclamation is being pursued by particular communities. But yes, it's a great question, and I hope that there is some AI out there that would assist in the future. Thank you.
I have 2 comments on that. So we have always had problems with the use of our indigenous language in the digital world. All the platforms, all metadata which exists, it didn't have much of that, didn't have or couldn't include our language and our concepts and even our language characters, how we write our language. But I believe that this digitization era is giving us possibilities to make our indigenous language heard more wider than it has been heard just in private conversations, in communities, in families, and so on. One example can be from our work with the Smithsonian Institution. We are in conversations with them about publication of some of the models, 3D models, which we made of our cultural heritage, which is stored in Washington on their platform, which is Voyager, with a text in the Sami language about these particular objects. So, and I hope that we will be able to do it together with our American colleagues. So with the text in the indigenous Sami language, which will accompany the model made by us as indigenous representatives in the American Museum collection. So this is one thing. And another, I don't know, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence at all, but some of our Sami youth who are studying artificial intelligence, we had some talks about how we could visualize a new museum building for our museum. And so we talked, and I understood that the artificial intelligence generator or whatever it is, it needs a kind of command, a kind of something to understand what it is going to create. And then we wanted to make something which is based on the philosophy and the structure of our reindeer chorale, which has a very sophisticated Sami terminology. And of course, this artificial intelligence couldn't do a thing because it doesn't understand and does not know about the existence of this terminology and these things in this indigenous language. So in a way, I thought, well, this is good. So not everything is accessible.
Yeah, I'm often asked to come as an expert to consult on projects that people who are making language revitalization or preservation projects around. And oftentimes they're not Indigenous people. And so I definitely encourage Indigenous groups. I'm part of a lot of great groups of AI experts and coders who are Native and who are Indigenous. So I try to encourage people that you actually can look from within your community. Yelena, you're obviously working with your youth who are studying these things. I try to encourage people to do that, to say, you work with Indigenous preservation of language with coders and data sovereignty experts who are from your community, rather than saying, okay, we need to do this, so we need to give away all of this data to a third party. I don't think you need to do that. We are not at that point where we need to do that. We have wonderful people within our own community, wonderful networks of other Indigenous technologists and people who work in AI who who understand sovereignty, or at least can be open to listen and learn about what your nation needs or what your community needs. Because I think there are some harms that can come from allowing our information. I hear a lot of these projects wanting to sort of sell our wisdom back to us. And I've had even some quite negative experiences seeing groups that have worked for many, many years to get their language to a group of people that promised to make them an app or some kind of curriculum, only to sell it back to them, at exorbitant prices that they couldn't afford. And now all of those people have passed on. That last 10 years, if they were working within their community, by their community, they would still have that information. And then it it becomes something that is not kept up to date, not kept at all, because it was just made for profit. The people that made it don't care. It dissolves. Those 10 years are gone. I don't want that to happen to anyone else. I've seen that happen and been part of communities that reached out for me to help them when they were in those situations working with these type of predatory technologists. And it's sad. And I just don't want anyone to go through that. And again, if I could say anything in this talk, I would say, reach out to your community. There are young ones in your community who can help you cope.
Thanks. And with that, we're out of time. So I just want to thank all of you for sharing your work with us. It's really been a privilege for me to be able to learn from you today. And I also want to, thank Stanford Global Studies for bringing us all together, and for everyone who joined us and posed questions. So thank you all. And it's great to chat with you.
Olo kiitos. Thank you.